The Jewish holiday Tu Bishvat literally means New Year of the Trees. What's the correlation between Yahweh and tree worship?
Well, it's the whole of Judaism. Now, again, this is another question that gets to the heart of everything, so we don't need to fuss about with other, questions. Once you've nailed this, it goes back to the Phoenicians, and the Phoenicians go back to the area. So the building of the Temple of Solomon was with trees. In the center of the temple was a yew tree. That's right, folks. Right, a yew tree stood there for centuries, sacred. And it all goes into tree worship. I wrote a double volume on it called Trees of Life. And that all of Judaism and all of Egyptology is based on tree worship. All of it. And the purest form of tree worship in the world was Druidism. And derivative of that, you get terms like door, which door is made of wood. Doira is one of the roots of the word druid, a tree lover, oak king or whatever. And the same cult existed in Egypt as what we call Amonists. And so although they were solar and they definitely were stellar, they looked up to cosmic events, that's mostly a derivative of the most ancient cult of all, which is the stellar cult. So all later nations and peoples, borrowed the great archives. And one great archive was the celestial pole, the seven stations of the heavens, and the stellar cult iconography, which I go through in all my books. As I continued studying this, I found out that there's a fusion between the other great archive, which is tree worship, that the stellar cult were also basically a Druidic cult who worship trees. They looked at the pole as a tree, just like you see Yggdrasil, right, in the northern Norse of the great world ash tree. Well, these guys had that. They worshiped the placenta. You see pictures in ancient Egypt, right, of a female placenta. But as I show in Trees of Life book, that was worshipped in itself, yeah, for various reasons, but it was mostly worshipped because it looks like the blood veins in a placenta, I show pictures that are tree-like. The river Nile, remember as it goes towards the delta, it fans out and looks like a great cosmic tree. And then when you follow, and then he met Jehovah at a burning bush. And then there's the great oak of Shechem mentioned in the book of Genesis. But wait a minute, aren't there two other famous trees? Now, what would they might be in the Garden of Eden? Let me think, two trees. And on it goes. And Jesus is crucified on the holyrood, right, the tree. So implicit, and it is implicit, you wouldn't notice it unless somebody pointed it out to you. Terah, the father of Abraham, consecrates a great oak on the so-called journey from Chaldea into Egypt. And just to back up on the Hyksos there, Ralph Ellis has established that they weren't foreign to Egypt. They were always members of Egypt. So the Jews, the Israelites, were Egyptians, right? I have a bit of a slight nuance to that, is I think that there's a possibility that they, although they were Egyptian in exactly the way Ralph says, their ancestors, the Hyksos ancestors, probably came from outside. So there's a slight little difference there, but these are minor. I do think the Hyksos came from outside, but they colonized first, northern, which would be lower Egypt, and then the whole kerfuffle you hear is about them actually trying to take over upper Egypt. And luckily, it was Pharaoh Amos the first, who prevented that, and later on other pharaohs prevented it. And then finally, the Hyksos were considered such an enormous threat that they were completely defeated and thrown out. But getting back to tree worship, all these different peoples worship trees. So the tree worship, so there's three, right? But they're connected. All the races of the world, despite superficial differences, castes, color, wealth, whatever you want to, they're all united by one thing: stellar worship. That's astrotheology. The second thing that you find as a connecting tissue is tree worship. And the third one that matters a great deal is serpent worship. But once you have understood those three, the gnosis of those three, you have the ancient world in your pocket. And then now you know anything you need to know about Persians, Babylonians, Assyrians, Chaldeans, Irish Celts, Nordics, Goths, Hindus, whatever, even the Chinese, the Ainu people, even down in the far remote places like New Zealand. they're going to have access and interpretations to all three of those gnostices. But tree worship is probably one of the most primordial and ancient. And it is such a vast, such a vast subject, you know, that I had to write 2 volumes on it. There's a website, treesoflife.uk, you know, or you can just go to michaeltsarion.com and you'll see my site, to Trees of Life, and there's 2 books on that. Again, nobody's ever interviewed me on that subject. Nobody's interviewed me on astrotheology. You're the only one. I think we can kind of, you know, make a wild guess as to why that is. People don't like their dogma balloons burst. So it's good to get to talk about this. I know it sounds very scattered, but it is a very scattered subject. So it needs a person who can handle that, you know, to bring it all together, even though it sounds, until you first get familiar with it, it sounds kind of scattered.